With the latest edition of Codex Space Marines, we were officially given 4 successor chapters of the Salamanders. So far, I've tackled 3 of those 4, the Dragon Spears, Covenant of Fire, and the Dark Krakens, and in this guide, I'll be tackling the last of these new successors. I'm Pete the Wargamer, and in this video, I'll be showing you how to convert members of the Black Vipers. I began this conversion by using one of the Primaris Eliminators as the basis. Now, while I've chosen this particular kit as my starting point, most of the conversions that I made to this model can be easily employed on other Primaris kits too, with only a little tweaking required. So I started out by removing all the components required to build one of the Eliminators. Once these had been removed, I set about removing any mold lines or sprue tabs using my knife. The first adjustment that I needed to make to the model was to the neck. The Eliminator heads don't feature the usual ball and socket setup that most Space Marines have. Instead, the neck is a flat surface with a small notch. As I was planning on using a regular Space Marine head, I needed to create a smoother area. I used my knife to carefully trim away the small tab, removing it bit by bit, until the neck was completely flat. I did this before assembly to make things easier, but once it was removed, I could go about gluing together the torso and the legs. With the torso built and prepped, I could actually begin working on the unique aspects of the Black Vipers. The Codex has very little information about these guys. We know only that they are very secretive and are often accompanied by their agents of call. Combined with their black and red colour scheme, I believe that the Vipers are essentially Call's personal chapter. Following this line of thought, I began with the weapon. As I was using the Eliminator kit, I had a choice between the Last Fusil and the Instigator Bolt Carbine, of which I chose the former of the two. I wanted to soup this weapon up, add extra cables and gizmos, and give it the appearance that it was an experimental prototype. However, before I could do this, I need to make a few adjustments first. I began by clipping away the barrel, as well as the small cable that was usually protruding from the rear of the scope. With these clipped away, I trimmed the cuts flat by using my knife. Now, Call doesn't quite have the same hang-ups about technology that his counterparts do. He is quite happy to not only work on and develop new technologies, but also work on those that are expressly forbidden, such as Xenos tech. This is evident in his other work, with the most obvious being the distinctly Tau-looking shield dome fitted to the impulsor. To represent this on the model, I chose to incorporate some Necron technology, specifically the synaptic disintegrator from the Necron death marks. I wanted to take the barrel from this alien rifle and transplant it onto the Space Marines' Last Fusil stock. I didn't want the barrel to extend too far, but equally didn't want to use too little of the rifle either. Ultimately, I settled on clipping away the barrel 3 segments away from the muzzle. After comparing this against the Last Fusil, I could see that the supporting strut beneath the disintegrator's barrel also needed to be removed. This was clipped away before I cleaned up the component, ensuring that all the contact points were smoothed out. With this done, I was then ready to attach the barrel to the rest of the weapon. At this stage, I was left with 2 halves of the rifle. I needed to join these separated parts, but regular glue alone just wouldn't cut it. The small surface areas of the contact points will be far too small to glue easily, and when they finally did take, their precarious position outside the model's base would make them susceptible to damage. So, to help strengthen that join, I needed to pin the barrel. I started by using my pin vise with a 1mm bit to drill a hole into the centre of the small round disc I had left protruding. With the rifle drilled, I then began the delicate process of drilling the barrel. The diameter of this part was much narrower so I had to carefully ensure that it was dead centre of the barrel before I started drilling, going just a couple of millimeters into the plastic. With the holes drilled, I could bring in the pin. I used some 1mm steel wire here, and as it's the same thickness as the hole, it fits into the holes nicely. I added a bit of glue to the end and pushed it into the hole in the barrel. I gave the glue a chance to dry before bringing in my clippers and cutting the protruding wire so that it just had a couple of millimeters left from the barrel. More glue was then added to this before it was glued into the hole into the rifle. The pieces should fit together nicely, and now we have a much stronger bond. Next, I wanted to enhance the haphazard prototype aspect of the weapon. A simple way of doing this was to add some exposed cables. As the weapon hadn't been yet refined, these dangling cables made sense. I took the remnants of a synaptic disintegrator and used my clippers to cut away the cable, cutting as close to the rifle as possible. This was compared to the rifle to see where it could fit and what trims I then needed to make. These cuts were done before the cable was glued to the prototype rifle. The disintegrator rifle came with a separate pipe component which I promptly made use of on my prototype weapon. Again, I compared the pipe to the rifle to see what I needed to adjust. I then used my knife to make these trims before also gluing this into place. Now, I wasn't quite done with the weapon just yet. This is quite a focus point of the conversion, so I wanted something that was very different from any other Space Marine weapon. There are a whole bunch of extra gizmos, valves, pipes, and similar gubbins that you can source from other kits, specifically the Adeptus Mechanicus range. I took these plasma culverin valves from the Cataphrone Destroyers kit. To attach these to the rifle stock, I made a few trims to the underside to help flatten them out, and then these were glued into place, and the rifle was finally completed. With the rifle completed, I could carry on assembling the rest of the model, so I fixed the left arm into place as per the instructions. Now, I was also going to attach the power source to the rifle, but I ultimately decided to leave this and the rifle separate from the body. This would make painting everything later far easier. The next deviation from the original kit came in the form of the power pack. Instead of using the standard Eliminator pack, I chose one of the Incursor backpacks due to the option to add additional sensor equipment. I didn't apply this just yet, as I wanted to add more prototype gizmos to the model. This particular component came from another AdMech kit, the Skitarii. It is normally used for special weapons, but it is perfectly sized to place over the Space Marine's power pack. I clipped the small raised ridge from the underside of the pack and then used my knife to smooth it out. When I compared this against the power pack, I could see that it was still protruding a little too much. So using a mixture of a knife and a file, I flattened out the dome. With this done, the Skitarii opponent could be glued into place. Now that I'd made the necessary cuts and changes to the pack, I was able to add the extra sensor items. Out of the choice of the aerials and the optics, I chose the latter. As this pointed in the same direction of the rifle, I felt that it was acting in a way that would allow Call or his lackeys to review performance data at real time or at a later point. Like with the rifle, I decided to keep the pack separate to make painting it much easier later on. Finally, I just needed a helmet for this Black Viper. While I have touched on their mysterious and slightly darker nature, I wanted to emphasize this on the model. So I chose the skull-faced helmet from the Reaver's kit. This helmet would help to give the model a slightly more sinister look, but to make it fit, I needed to trim the rounded neck joint in order to make it fit against that flat surface. With the helmet glued into place, I had just one more adjustment to make. Instead of the Eliminator standing on a small rocky outcrop, I instead grabbed myself an old Mark VII Space Marine helmet. While it's not quite a dead animal bit, I'm happy to settle for dead marine bits instead. This was sawed in half at a diagonal angle. One half of this helmet was then glued to the base to create the appearance that it was partly buried in the ground. Once I was happy with its position, I trimmed the small tab from the Eliminator's foot before gluing the model onto the base. The result is a slight nod to how these guys could be employed by Call. No doubt he'd love to see his Primus take over as being the only Space Marines out there, and so it wouldn't be too much of a stretch of the imagination to think about him working on ways to ensure his Marines can retire the older, obsolete defenders of humanity. And with that, the model just needed to be based and painted, which left me with this. And here we have the finished Black Viper. I painted him in black and reds of the chapter, which tied nicely into the theme being controlled and influenced by Call and his AdMech associates. I opted to use some glowing green effects on various areas of the model, not only to help them stand out, but also to help them hint at the use of Necron technology. And so, that concludes this fourth and final Salamander Successor conversion guide. This series has not only been great fun, but also a rewarding challenge. Tackling chapters that only have a name, one image, and a small paragraph of background meant that I had a lot more freedom. I could build my own interpretations of the chapters without the worry of getting their lore wrong or missing out on something important. So, if you haven't done so already, then please do check out my previous successor conversions for the Dragon Spears, Covenant of Fire, and the Dark Krakens, and let me know which successors you'd like to see me take on next. And so, the final thing to say is a massive thank you to all of my supporters. Whether you support me on Patreon, buy me a coffee, or you just use my affiliates links, your help is what keeps this channel alive and is what allows me to build these conversions for you. If you would like to help me out, then you can check out my Buy Me a Coffee page or my Patreon page, which you can find links to in the description below. And so until next time, thanks for watching and goodbye.